Come September, the Symphony Hall in Birmingham will hopefully be full to the rafters with a capacity audience enjoying the premiere of Edward Gregson's The World Rejoicing. It should have premiered last year, but with COVID cancellations was moved to this year's contest as part of a multi-country collaboration on the commission. We enjoyed a very pleasant morning with Eddie at his Cheshire home to get an insight into the piece. So Eddie, the last time we spoke, we'd just launched your work, The World Rejoicing, at the RNCM back in January of last year, and then the world stopped for this awful pandemic. How must that have felt to you, just launching the work and then everything's put on stop?
Yes, I remember it well, Martin. That was the end of January, and we all thought everything was going to go as it should have done. Yeah, it was very, very disappointing. But then, when you consider what's happened in the world, I suppose you could say that a piece of music not being premiered was really not very important within the whole realm of what was happening, and it's been very, very difficult. Been very difficult, of course, in our music profession for everybody. It's been difficult for professional orchestras, operas, ballet companies, but in the world of brass bands, it's been really difficult because whilst professional musicians, as you know, have been allowed back to work over the last few months, brass bands have not been, like choirs, amateur choirs, not allowed to rehearse. So it's been very difficult, and now here we are, in the middle of April. Hopefully, we will be seeing brass bands performing again to capacity audiences. Let's hope so.
But the piece was a first in its kind because it was taken up by 5 different countries as their commissions for their own national championships.
Yes, it was, and I have to thank Jappie Dijkstra from the Netherlands, a good friend of mine for many, many years. He had the idea, and this takes you back again over 2 years, in fact about 3 or 4 years ago, when my 75th birthday was sort of on the horizon. And he thought what a wonderful idea it would be if we could have a new work, not just for the UK, obviously, or for the Netherlands, but for as many European countries as wanted to join the consortium. There's never been anything quite like this before. And maybe it is a template for the future. I mean, in the sense that if bands want to commission major composers to write works, as I hope they'll continue to do, financially it's an expensive business, and so a consortium of 1, 2, 3 or 4 countries getting together would make that possible.
Historically, there were style differences between different countries who had a brass band influence. The British style was very different to the Norwegian, to the Japanese style. This work brings a common link between all of those styles and encompasses it in one fantastic 16-minute piece.
Well, when I was thinking about what kind of piece to write, I was aware that the last 2 pieces I wrote for brass band, the last two major pieces I wrote, were in 2012, or just before that actually, and they couldn't be more different, those 2 pieces. There was the Symphony in 2 Movements,
yes,
which was commissioned by the National Youth Bands of Great Britain and Wales, and actually the British Open, but that's another matter. And then of Distant Memories, which was written for the centenary of the national championships in the Royal Albert Hall. So they're 2 very different pieces because they set out to do different things. For the National Youth Bands, I wanted to really test them musically as much as technically, and intellectually as well. So the piece is perhaps the most abstract piece I've ever written for brass band, and so I was seeking out what would be a tune which actually most European countries would know. And of course this one, Nun danket alle Gott, which is Now Thank We All Our God, written in 1638, a Lutheran chorale. This is the hymn, you'll all know it. juicy harmonies there, but you see the point. Everybody knows that. Now,
yes.
Thank We All Our God. that therefore was the piece that I decided, okay, it's going to be based on that.
Now, I don't want to age you, Eddie, but Connotations came out 44 years ago, but it's still fresh today. From a composer's point of view, how do you inject new ideas, new thoughts into an established medium which only has 25 set players? How do you keep the music refreshed?
The first thing I would say is that as a composer, and I speak on behalf of all composers, none of us are static. None of us write the same music as we did when we were 20. Hopefully you evolve and you mature as a composer and your style and language changes. I don't write in the same, strictly speaking, the same kind of language as Connotations now. Nevertheless, there is, and this was for other people to talk about, not me, but there's obviously something called a Gregson blueprint,
Yes.
which is part of Connotations and is still part of this. I can't really tell you, Martin, what that is, because it's part of my kind of natural, unconscious, or rather subconscious, essential being as a composer. But like I've said, The World Rejoicing is a different piece to the symphony and to Of Distant Memories. And that in itself, you know, there's about, what are they now, over 9 years ago. I suppose it's also, I should say, although it goes back to the world of variations on Laudate Dominum, again, it uses different techniques. They're both variation pieces, but they essentially still use the same framework of having the chorale coming at the end. So in fact, you don't hear the tune until the end. That's the common link between variations on Laudate and this. I decided that it would use roughly the same kind of structure as variations on Laudate Dominum. So you hear at the beginning, on solo trombone, you hear the first element of the tune, which is which immediately gives it a coloristic thing. So I can imagine on the day there's going to be a few very nervous trombone players, because after that he then has on his own up to a top C piano. So that in itself is quite tricky. But so you hear the first two elements of the first phrase before you hear anything else, but that's all you hear. So that's actually the prelude. Just in terms of the structure, Martin, what we've got is a structure which is a continuous structure, a prelude, which basically announces the first element of the tune. Then you have a capriccio, which is in a sense the first variation. La danza 1, processional, la danza 2, arias and duets, which is the big slow movement, lasts about 7 minutes in its own right, and then a fuga burlesque fugue, and then you hear the chorale and a postlude, which goes back to the very beginning of the piece. So it's a big sort of art-shaped structure with a prelude at the beginning, a postlude which links those two things, and all of these variation movements with different kind of elements musically in between.
If you had to summarise what you would be looking for from a performance to, for example, a set of adjudicators who'll be looking at this with fresh eyes, without any reference material to previous performances or recordings or anything like that, what would your summary to them be, Eddie?
Well, I've always said about this, it's always about the music. It's always about the music. There has to be, of course, a technical level that you reach, which is obvious, because you can't have a band making lots of technical errors and sort of winning the competition. But in the end, for me, and I've adjudicated quite a lot, for me, it's always the musical impact, the emotional impact that you get through the performance. And that, in the end, has to be the quality that comes through to anybody. And also, you have this collective response. You know, I'm sure you've been many times in either a concert or in a competition, brass band competition, where you hear the performance, you know, And there's a kind of collective consciousness about it that everybody feels. My goodness me, that was special. If it happens to be the last work I write for brass band, then I'd be happy to call it my swan song, because I'm quite proud of this piece. And on a personal note, of course, at the time I was writing it, my brother sadly died, and I was very close to my brother, and the piece is dedicated in memory of him.
Yes.
So for me, it's a very personal work, and I hope that the nature of that emotionally comes through in the music.
And a very fitting tribute as well. Eddie, it's been, as I say, a pleasure to spend time with you. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
And my best wishes for the future.
Thank you very much.